Stephen-Farrell, and Patrick Falstrom. I'm hoping that I'm reading those names correctly, because I'm not native Swedish speaker or Irish speaker. So please, I guess Stephen is opening, and you can use your screencast if you prefer, or we can stream your slides. Thank you.
Okay, and I assume you can hear me then. My audio is fine. So good afternoon. Yeah, so this is a talk, me leading off, and then Patrick. The topic, the title is, I guess, the encryption debate. I suppose I'm trying to provide a bit of background, and Patrick's set of slides in the second half will touch more on the debate issue. You can see these slides at that URL if you want to get them. The kind of TLDR is, encryption is there. It's not going away. And every time over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen new applications where we start to see more rolling out of use of confidentiality or encryption. It annoys somebody because it changes what they were previously doing. And you may or may not hear a kind of the sky is falling reaction, and the sky hasn't fallen. I don't think it will. But again, we can go back even before the kind of internet. And I think this is a point that will actually crop back up in Patrick's slides and the Q&A afterwards, and maybe some discussion to follow, is if you start right back at the beginning of telegraphy or any kind of communications mediums, then there was always a kind of a law enforcement requirement that essentially meant that everything needs to be tappable. In other words, that the law enforcement, if they need to get access to everything. And that as a requirement, ignoring the technology, ignoring the how exactly we're using encryption, etc., as a requirement, that's kind of problematic because it kind of hasn't changed, and yet it kind of needs to. And I think Patrick will touch on reasons why it's more difficult for law enforcement to discuss openly about those requirements, or to kind of give up something in terms of admitting that there is some data that they really shouldn't be able to tap. But that requirement has been there all the way from before the internet. And probably a discussion at the level of requirements might be interesting. Coming a bit more up to date, we've still had kind of crypto wars of the 90s, and I'm not going to revisit that, but I think one thing that's interesting is there were at the time kind of surveys that people did on what cryptographic products were on sale. So there's links here to 1999 and 2016. And really what's interesting is not the specific products, or is actually the change. In that period, what we've seen really is that back in the 90s, there was a sort of a set of encryption products. There was a set of companies, I used to work on, that actually were selling encryption or selling the ability to do encryption in various ways. But now in 2016, and now certainly, this is just a commodity. This is a standard feature of kind of everything. It's not really an interesting separate product category anymore. So I think the debate in the 90s was quite different to now, and now I think what we have is that the use of cryptography to provide various security services, whether that's confidentiality or integrity or authentication, is just a standard set of features. Of course, then we had Mr. Snowden popped up, and what became clear there was that the extent of the kind of government level kind of snooping that was happening in various places was more than the technical community kind of thought of. And there's, again, I won't kind of go into the details of the various links and so on, but there was a lot of interesting stuff that came out of that. Part of the outcome of that was in the ITF community, at least, and I think the ITF was just kind of broadly, reflecting the broader technical community reaction to this, was that we kind of agreed that this kind of pervasive monitoring itself is kind of an attack that we have to think about and defend against, and yet we also need to do things like network monitoring and so on. But so there's a kind of tension there. So we kind of acknowledge the tension, and it was clearly one of the reactions to this pervasive monitoring attack is that if you encrypt things, then they're less easily attacked, at least from the point of view of monitoring. So that was part of the kind of internet community, if you like, response to Snowden. And you can see that in various statistics. This is some Firefox telemetry, which kind of reflects over the period of kind of, from post-Snowden till recently, the increasing growth in HTTPS traffic. You see the same thing if you look at SMTP over TLS for mail traffic, and in various other ways. And I'm sure even in use of private APIs, the same is probably the case. And equivalently, we see the same with Let's Encrypt, which actually helped to generate the previous slide, is that now you can have kind of reliably reissued free certificates for your websites and so on, and you can see the numbers growing there too. So a couple of things just to help kind of tee up where these kind of tussles or whatever you want to call them might arise. DNS privacy has been something that started to be addressed in this kind of last 5-7 years or so. Originally people just assumed that the data in the DNS is public, therefore we don't need confidentiality or privacy mechanisms for DNS. That's clearly not the case, because the act of accessing a particular name or doing a query for a name can itself be sensitive. And there's a bunch of mechanisms that have been defined since 2013 to improve the privacy aspects of DNS. So QNAME minimization, which is not controversial at all. DNS padding, which is only useful if you're encrypting. If you're encrypting using DNS over TLS on port 853, that's also not controversial because it doesn't get used widely. And then it turns out we get something that is used widely, DNS over HTTPS, and particularly the concept that browsers may turn this on by default, that becomes suddenly controversial. It's worth noting that that's the controversy there. I don't think is about the encryption. It's really about moving the point of control from where it has been for many years to somewhere new. And I think that's the controversial part, really. And again, there's work on all of this. All of the above is essentially just looking at stub to recursive. There is work starting and maybe going to progress, hopefully in the near-ish future, on recursive to authoritative. There's also things like QUIC. QUIC is a new transport protocol that mostly encrypts things. And again, if people will react to the beginnings of deployment of these kind of things, but I have my existing network monitoring stuff, and now you're going to do also things over QUIC, and I can no longer see TCP headers or whatever, and that changes and breaks things. And sure, that is something that you need to adjust to. Again, I think it's also worth noting that confidentiality or privacy is not the only reason why people are encrypting using QUIC. They also deliberately want to cut middle boxes out of the conversation for good and bad reasons. So the good reasons might be to do ossification in the network. What some people might claim is a bad reason is because the endpoints maybe not acting in the end users and the people's interests, and then they also want to keep out middle boxes for what are good and bad reasons from different perspectives. But it's not necessarily doing encryption only for privacy. It's also again to put in to enforce controls on various bases. There's a bunch of newish crypto things that may affect the future. One thing to note, though, it's not new, it's an old one, is that we have seen with the Julie C random number generator a case where there was a deliberate attempt to introduce and deploy and promote broken crypto, broken random number generator in that case. And so we need one thing we needed as part of this is a large and a diverse set of academic cryptographers, not just people working for government agencies or on behalf of government agencies or in industry sponsored by government agencies. So this is a kind of a real need, and it's a real reason why we need to keep this kind of cryptographic debate, debate about encryption, open. The rule changes coming forward to do with post-quantum algorithms. They'll change things like packet sizes and so on that will have interesting implementation deployment effects. People are developing new cryptographic primitives all the time, oblivious pseudorandom functions and so on. Some of them might get used, some of them might not. And if we had fully homomorphic encryption, that would be great, but we don't. There's also more prosaic kind of challenges to do with the use of encryption. In particular, if we think back to the previous talk, it's kind of hard to get a certificate for an IP address. And for many kinds of IP addresses, you can't really authenticate devices, in particular if they're using, RC 1918 addresses or something, or IPv6 addresses that are kind of interesting. So there's a kind of challenge there to find ways for hosts to mutually authenticate, but in a way that kind of allows the device owner to do what they need to do without that kind of cloudy kind of lock-in to some vendors' names or whatever. And then, of course, we have to think also about just emitting a packet, whether it's encrypted or not, can leak sensitive information. So, an NTP query may, in fact, mean that somebody's just walked in a room and that might expose that kind of information. And that's all I had. Again, I think Patrick is going to grab the screen and take over, I believe, and if not, I'll be showing his slides. So Patrick,
thank you.
I think I give up the screen and you grab it, but we'll see.
There, let's see how this works. So let me try to have my presentation as well, and then we can answer questions. So let me continue where Stephen started. And he gave a good background demonstrating, I think, that in a very good way that encryption is something that is here to stay. We see innovation both on the cryptography side and also on the usage side. We see an interest in privacy and interest in encryption to be used in various ways. At the same time, we have a different camp, a different group of people that sort of that we heard sort of between the lines about, and that is the group of people that believe that encryption is bad. We had the discussion, not only what you just heard Stephen talk about, we also had the discussion about the clipper chip, that there should be encryption allowed, but a backdoor. We have the UK in 2017 that wanted to forbid end-to-end encryption. And we have the European Union that now in 2020 is pushing very hard to get backdoors in chats because end-to-end encryption is a bad thing. So the interest of being able to sort of having backdoors or in encryption is something that has not died. But of course, as I'm trying to explain, that is not how it's expressed. It's expressed as if encryption is good, everyone should use it, but I'm coming back to that. So the problem is that the politicians and people making the regulations, they at the moment, they think that, yes, we can have encrypted connections. They will be very safe, they will be secure, we can do all transactions they want in a secure way, but it will still allow law enforcement to access the unencrypted data. We are to have that at the same time, right? Specifically for those people like Stephen that understand the math behind it. I don't understand how to have both of them, specifically if you don't want to have a backdoor or claim that you don't have a backdoor. Another thing is that it is also possible to limit who can access unencrypted information. And I don't really understand how that should work either. Like if it is the case that it's a backdoor, then anyone can use it. Anyone that managed to get hold of the keys or a backdoor is a backdoor. And on top of that, even though people try to build good technical solutions for that, we see breaches every week when people try to do that kind of solutions. The third thing that I hear claims about is that we can allow law enforcement, which is specific entities, to access the unencrypted information without having a backdoor. And I just don't really understand how that should work. For example, in a situation with TLS and Let's Encrypt and whatnot. And another thing is that by sending encrypted messages and hashes, we keep secrets. And the problem is that, as Stephen also explained with the NTP packet, just sending the encrypted packet or a hash, regardless of how good the one-way hash is, it's still the case that you might disclose quite a lot of privacy-related issues that you actually wanted to protect. So there you also have a balance that is quite interesting to try to discuss where the right balance is. There's also a belief that criminals do follow legislation. To me, a criminal by definition is trying to just do whatever they want to stay hidden, regardless of what the legislation says, which means that all clients will do whatever the legislation requires the client to do. And then, of course, you have people doing clients that do other things as well. So the problem is that people believe that you can have all of these things at the same time. And this is something that started already, as Stephen explained, like many, many years ago, and it's still ongoing. And my main message with this session is to get everyone here on this, everyone in the RIPE community, to understand that this discussion is not dead. We need to continue to be active and remind people. Here's an example from a proposal in the EU. Many of you might have seen this, which is one proposal, possible solution on how to block and how to control the messages, even though they are encrypted. So the sending device is supposed to send both the full message and the hash, and the hash is not end-to-end encrypted. And then the hash is going to a specific app server for review. And this is one thing that is on the table at the moment, to force and require every protocol that is end-to-end encryption to behave like this. Every protocol. Of course, it's only talked about in the context of images and protection of children and all that kind of stuff. But between the lines, you see, this is something that people want to have all over the place. Another way of implementing this, which is another proposal, is to require anyone that has end-to-end encryption. Of course, end-to-end encryption is always going through the cloud, right? So everyone must have a secure enclave in the center that is trusted, and inside the secure enclave you can access the unencrypted data, even though it's end-to-end. I just don't understand how that should be implemented either, but there are people that, as I said, is proposing something like this. I have no idea how it should work. It's just weird. So the European Commission, the guiding principles, which I don't really remember the date, but it was like a month ago or something, the latest published principle. There might have been an updated version of this, but it really talks about that an optimal solution is the one that would allow users to enjoy the benefits of encryption with regards to privacy and data protection, while allowing law enforcement agencies to preserve the capability to lawfully intercept communication or gain lawful access to encrypted devices and encrypted data when this is warranted by a judge, prosecutor, or similar empowered official. This is what the Commission is telling to politicians in EU at the moment, that this is something that is possible to implement both technically and in legislation. Okay, let me get that out to you, all of you. Think about what this implies. So here we have one thing that increased the volume and people believing that this message is true is, of course, the incident with EncroChat. EncroChat handsets emerged in 2016. Most of you probably read in the news. It's a messaging app which routes conversation through a server based in France. It's also the case that the devices themselves are updated from this server, and the Dutch police, together with the gendarmerie in France, they collaborated. They managed to inject a malware that managed to get them to read the messages before they were sent. They managed to inject this malware on the phones themselves, etc. And that way they could actually collect data from the conversations for quite a long time. The data was then distributed to other European partners, including the UK, Sweden, and Norway. That is, using this as evidence in various court cases. There are still many open court cases, so we'll see what happens with this. But anyways, this is something that the law enforcement other says, oh, this is great. We can, by doing it this way, implementing it this way, it worked. We can catch many criminals. So every chat service should be designed like EncroChat, and they should be that by law. So they're pushing at the moment quite hard. In each one of the member states, and of course I know Sweden better than other countries, we have norms, both norms in the society, but also legislation that is very picky regarding the difference between legal intercept and also data retention. And for example, in Sweden, the law enforcement need to ask to be able to intercept messages or wiretap for a specific individual. It must be a suspect, etc. They are not allowed to do phishing with the help of wiretap, if I exaggerate a little bit. But the question then is EncroChat a phishing expedition, or is it something where they are really targeting suspected parties? Or is this a situation where law enforcement are using weaknesses and differences in the legislation in each other states? They're all pretty interesting questions. The problem at the moment is that this discussion about these issues are discussed more or less without the technical community, more or less without us. So the problem is that to some degree we are stuck, or I would hope that we at least are stuck. Law enforcement do have problems to have some of these discussions in public because they cannot disclose their tactics, of course, because as we already concluded, criminals are not following legislation. They're just trying to do whatever they have to do so that law enforcement cannot catch them. Civil society and technology must have the discussion in public. It has been a little bit too silent the last year, I think, and that's why I requested, together with Stephen and a few others, to actually have this presentation to wake you up. Don't fall asleep. It's not over yet. Unfortunately, as I showed when some of the arguments, it's like forcing a round peg in a square hole. And just because that is what's at the moment happening, we must be participating in that operation. So this is both a technical problem and a legal problem. And I think both civil society, this is exactly where we need the multi-stakeholder discussion. We need to have law enforcement, we need to have technical community, and we need to have civil society. And we need to have constructive suggestions on what to do, not only what can be done, cannot be done, etc. So as Stephen explained, all internet communication today is actually encrypted in one way or another, or we from the technical community together with others are trying to ask people to use TLS, to have the communication encrypted, to have secure and robust services. But unfortunately, that's the square hole within which people are trying to force a round peg. Thank you. End.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Stephen. It's an exciting topic. I see the chat is steering with all the comments and some great quotes. So let me read the from, well, it's actually not that many, but let's start. Alex de Jode from I'm6. Well, it's a comment, but I'll read it anyway. Under the Portuguese EU presidency, July 1st, 2021, expect a proposal with regard to access to E2E. URL follows. Oh, great. Olaf Kaufman, Internet Society. I would like to offer additional comment at the end of Patrick's presentation. We hear you, Olaf, you'll get that. And then Vyacheslav Yerokhin, Academia, I guess. How public interests, child online production, blocking pirate and extremist sites, law enforcement can be secured in case of DOH, DOT implementations. So you guys can answer that.
So yeah, I mean, there's various approaches. I mean, some of the DOH or DOT services, some of the public recursive services will offer both an unfiltered version and a filtered version on a different port or on a different DOH URL and so on. So I suspect, deployments will kind of address these problems to the extent that you actually believe that these many things work. Personally, I'm a bit skeptical, but some people do like them, and I think that they will become available.
Thank you. Andrew Campling at 419 Consulting asks, excellent presentation. I agree that an open multi-stakeholder discussion is the way forward. Given the many continuing privacy transgressions by tech companies, is the focus on E2E encryption really an attempt by the sector to divert attention from surveillance capitalism? That's a good one.
So yes and no. I think personally I think that within those tech companies there are a whole bunch of people who have this set of interests that this community has and are genuinely trying to improve privacy. And those companies like to make money, and they do it via surveillance capitalism sometimes. So I think the answer is yes and no.
Well, looks like there is no way to answer those questions.
No, and this,
right
let me pitch in that regarding what Alex wrote about the Portuguese EU presidency. I think the pictures that I showed is actually from an earlier version of the proposal regarding end-to-end encryption. It's also the case, a little bit unfortunate that the Commission is claiming that they have had meetings with the technical community. in reality, they have had closed meetings where they invited certain companies and certain big companies, and then we end up in a question: how open have that discussion been? Which falls into what Stephen just said, that even within the large companies like Microsoft and Facebook and others, which have been at some of those meetings, there are, of course, they have split interest in different parts of the companies. Where, for example, Microsoft, they have a very interesting what they call some kind of, I don't remember the exact name, some image DNA like thing that they would like to, it's simply a technology that they would like to sell on top of course, a company's corporate social responsibility will help to protect children, like all companies and others will do. But they all try to sort of make money and then sell their specific idea to the community. So even in the balance discussions that all of us should participate in, the multi-stakeholder discussion, there might still be lobbyism to have closed source solutions and non-open solutions. The good solutions are the ones that Stephen talked about, I think, between the lines, where we all agree on open standards, a good balance, how to detect whether there's a policy in the network to use certain DOT or DOH servers, etc., and allow the ability to choose, as well as implementing a well-informed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Stephen. Olaf Kaufman wanted to say something. I have granted him video rights. We still have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Perfect. Yes, excellent presentation to the both of you, Stephen, Patrick. Thank you very much. I'm Olaf Kolkman. I work with the Internet Society. This is a topic that is of great interest to us. And just to stress that this is a moving target right now. There is an open call in Mauritius with a weird proposal, I should say. The UK has just launched its online public safety bill, which contains no explicit mention of encryption, but is regulation that is target outcome, like we want to stop gravity from happening, that sort of idea behind it. There is movement in Canada, there is movement in Brazil, there's movement in Australia. This is being phrased as a safety versus security topic. And we need people who understand the technology, that can explain how things work. I think that's very important. I think that is the call that I heard from Patrick. Get engaged in this conversation. If you're interested, I would like to point you to the Global Encryption Coalition, which is, if you Google for it, it's first hit, which is a coalition of NGOs and individuals that are interested in preventing encryption to be attacked in that way. So that was what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Olaf. Do you mind sharing the link in the chat for those who have missed the exact naming of that?
Yep.
And I guess we are checking for the one last question. Audio or textual? I don't see one yet. So thank you all presenters. I had my best day. IPv6 and DNS security. What else can I wish for? Just to shake hands with all of you, and that will be perfect. So with that said, thank Wolfgang as well for co-sharing that, and thanks to our wonderful RIPE staff. There's a Valerie. Is that a question, I suppose? We really are short on time. Let me see. Yeah, I see. Okay, Valerie, you'll get that minute, but that's pretty much all. Thank you.